Well, y'all, I can tell you that this has been a great reading year for me, and I'm so excited to take a look back at all of the wonderful books that I've read this year, and also a couple that maybe fell a little flat for me. So in this video, I'm going to be tier ranking all of the books that I've read this year, and stick around with me if you want to find out about some of the books that I've read this year. Alright guys, so I'm going to start with my end of year wrap up by taking a look at my Goodreads year in books. I think that's such a cool thing that Goodreads offers at the end of each year to just give you a chance to take a look back at some of your reading statistics through the year. So it looks like this year I've read 15,381 pages. That's pretty good for me. And I've read 48 books. So my goal was actually 35 books. Last year I made my goal 40 books and I only read 30. So that was kind of disappointing. So this year I wanted to challenge myself a little bit and I shot for 35. And I overdid it, and I just finished my 48th book this morning. And I'm kind of hoping to squeeze in a couple more graphic novels before the end of the year. So I'm going to try to get to 50. That'd be pretty cool. It also tells me that my shortest book was this marked Valkyrie Academy Dragon Alliance, and that is a prologue. My longest book was A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. It was 1,177 pages. And those are long books. I really love them. My goal is to read one each year because if I read more than that, I wouldn't have a very good book count. And one a year is kind of perfect for me because if I read too many of them at one time, I get kind of bogged down and bored with reading, and I don't want to do that. So I kind of mixed it up a little bit. So that was my longest book. My average book length in 2021 was 320 pages. The most popular book that I read was Cinder. I actually started that series this year, and I made it pretty far into the series. I haven't finished it yet, but I am loving that series, so I can see why it is the most popular. And then my least popular was Marked the Valkyrie Academy Dragon Alliance. My average rating for 2021 was 4.1, so I rated my books pretty high this year. It was really a great reading year for me. I just read some really great books, so that's where that came from. My highest rated book on Goodreads is When Stars Are Scattered. Oh, that was such a good one. That one was a tearjerker for me. It is a nonfiction graphic novel based on a true story. So good. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I'm tier ranking. Also, my first review of the year was Mighty Jack and the Goblin King. That's another graphic novel. Here's just a quick glance at all of the books that I read this year. You can see a few of them are 5 stars. And then this was my last review of the year, Skeleton Tree. I actually finished that one this morning. I wrote that review when I finished that. So there's just a quick overview of what I have read. Now let's get to the tier ranking. All right. So I have all of my book covers down here, all 48 books that I have read, and these are my tiers. So I didn't have any 1-star reads, so I left that off. So I've got 5 stars and then 2 stars all the way at the bottom. Once I get them all ranked based on how I rated them on Goodreads, I'm going to go through and pick out a few of my absolute favorites for my favorites tier. So I see 5 Worlds first, so I'm going to start with 5 Worlds. This one is a graphic novel, pretty science fiction-y. This one is the first one of the series, so it is part of a series. This one's called The Sand Warrior. So it's really a lot of world building and just kind of setting up the characters and the plot. It was fun. It was definitely more geared for like middle school or younger. So for that, I feel like that, it would definitely be a great book. For me as an adult reader, it just wasn't. It was okay. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It was just okay. So I gave it 3 stars. All right, so A Court of Silver Flames. This was probably my most highly anticipated read of the year. You all, if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, probably know that I'm a huge A Court of Thorns and Roses fan. I started reading those books just after I joined the booktube and bookstagram communities because they were so hyped and everybody was talking about them and I just had to read them myself. And of course I ended up on that bandwagon and falling in love with them just as much as everybody else did. And going into this one, I really didn't know what to expect because it's from Nesta's point of view. And this entire time we've been reading from Feyre's point of view. And Nesta has been kind of labeled as this nasty, arrogant, just fun sucker of a sister. And I did not like her at all throughout the entire series until I got to this book. And this book completely changed how I felt about Nesta as a character. It made me realize that why am I tearing up and getting emotional about this? I have such a personal connection to this book. It made me realize that I am a lot more like Nesta than I thought. And I just ended up becoming personally acquainted with Nesta as a character. There was just so many things that she went through and so many thoughts that she had about herself and so much growth and development in her character that I fell in love with her. And it helped me work through a lot of mental things too as I watched her or read about her working through them. It also didn't help that her love interest in the book ends up being Cassian, who has always been my favorite male character in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. So I just can't say enough good things about this book. So obviously it's going to be a 5-star read for me. It was a hefty book. It's almost 800 pages, 757 pages. I felt like I took my time reading it just because I loved it so much and I didn't want it to end. But it did not feel like I was reading it. Like, it was so effortless. There were so many good parts that I would get so excited about. My heart would break in certain parts, and I would get goosebumps reading certain parts. And I just loved it. I loved every moment of reading this book. So that's definitely a 5-star read. Okay, let's move on. If I talk this much about every book, we are going to be here forever. All right, so then the next book that I have listed here is A Storm of Swords. All right, so this is A Storm of Swords. It is number 3 in George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, which the Game of Thrones TV series is based on. Overall, it was really good. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It took quite a bit to read, but I found a new technique that worked really well for me. I would listen to the audiobook and follow along, so that really helped me to kind of move through this book a little bit more since it was so lengthy. I gave it 4 stars. This is a book that I read really early on this year. I haven't read the second one yet. I have it, which I'm kind of surprised because it did. If I remember correctly, it left on a little bit of a cliffhanger. All right, so All the Stars and Teeth is definitely a young adult fantasy novel. Has a lot to do with sea travel in the ocean. It's really, really, really good, and I loved it. It was good. I really loved it, and I didn't quite see it as a 5-star read. I try really hard to reserve my 5-star reads. They're really the best of the best. But I am excited to read the second book in the installment, All of the Tides of Fate, I believe is what it's called. So I gave that one 4 stars as well. All right, so moving on to Beasts of Prey. This was a more recent book that I read. I actually just read it. This book just released toward the end of the year. I believe it was in September that it released. Yeah, September 28th. I will say this book's about 496 pages, so it's a little long. The first 200 pages was really kind of hard to get through and a little bit dry. And I almost DNF'd it. I was very close to DNFing it. I don't do that often. It's very rare that I DNF a book, but I kept thinking it's almost the end of the year, and I have so many other books I want to read, and it was just really hard to get through, and then it picked up. So there was this mysterious part at the beginning about a night circus that I was really into, but it was really just the very beginning of the story, and then it kind of went away. And then about 200-ish pages in, we finally get into the Greater Jungle. And once we get into the Greater Jungle, the action picked up, and the connections between the characters picked up, and we start learning that there are secrets that we didn't know about, and twists and turns and family dynamics and history that we didn't know about. So it starts getting really, really, really good. So I definitely recommend, if you read it, get past the first 200 pages and then you're good. So don't DNF it, push through, and it will totally be worth it. So because it was slow going, but it still ended up being a very good book, I rated that one 4 stars as well. All right, so this is one I was like really excited about. I received it in a Beacon book box earlier in the year. So it was okay. I think the premise of the book was a really great idea. I just don't know if it was executed quite as well as I'd hoped. I absolutely hated that it ended on such an intense cliffhanger, and I do plan on reading the second book, just because I want to know what happens next. But this one, I guess, because I was disappointed, it was so hyped in my mind because I was so excited about reading it, and then it just ended up being I gave that one 3 stars. So Book Uncle and Me was a book that I read with the 3rd graders at my school in the library. This is a new book to me. I really enjoyed reading it. It was a lot of fun to read with the kiddos, and I did love how it introduced young readers to the Indian culture. And for that reason, it was just a really sweet story. I gave it 4 stars. All right, Books of Umber was a book that I drew from my TBR jar. It had been sitting on my shelf for quite some time. I think it was a book that I grabbed from Goodwill at one point or another. It is a middle grade novel, fantasy novel. A younger version of myself probably would have given this a 5-star rating, but as an older reader, it fell flat in a few areas, so I gave that one 4 stars. All right, Called Upon is another book that I received in a Beacon book box earlier this year. It's a pretty short read. It was only 268 pages, and I actually read it as part of the Try Wizardathon readathon that happened in November. One of the prompts for that readathon was to read a book at least 240 pages in 24 hours or less, and I was able to finish this book in 24 hours or less. It pretty much hooked me from the get-go, but I love that it was a short read. I think that it was kind of the perfect length for this story. It didn't drag on too much. The action was kind of non-stop, and there were twists and turns around every corner, and I love kind of stories like that I really don't even know. I guess it would be science fiction. Yeah, a science fiction thriller. I just loved it. So I gave that one 5 stars. Cardboard's a graphic novel that I have at my school library. I was really surprised with this book. I thought it was just kind of a fun graphic novel that a lot of the boys enjoyed reading. But there's a lot deeper story there. Definitely a more emotionally charged story than I expected, and I really love that. So I gave that one a 5-star rating. It's Cinder Scarlet Crest. Are the first 3 books in the Lunar Chronicles series. I started those this year. I read all of those through audiobook as I was shelving books in my school library. I love listening to books while I'm doing that. And I love them. They were great audiobooks. The narrator did a wonderful job of narrating these stories. I enjoyed all of them. I will say that Scarlet was my favorite one so far out of those 3. And I have started Winter, but Winter is a lot longer than the other ones. So it's taken me a long time to get through it. So let's see. Let's take a look. So Cinder, I absolutely love that it was a science fiction fairy tale retelling. I hadn't read many science fiction fairy tale retellings. That was a super neat setup there. Okay, so Cinder, I rated 5 stars. Scarlet, I rated 5 stars. And Cress, I rated 4 stars. All right, Cruel Prince was a book I read earlier in the year. Let me see what I rated it. I remember absolutely loving it, and I have the next book in the series, but I haven't started it yet. I really need to read it because I loved it so much. I just love that it mixed the modern world with fairyland. I just think that was super cool. I enjoyed it so much that I did rate that one 5 stars as well. Then Dragon Hoops was a graphic novel, a nonfiction graphic novel that I had to read for one of my graduate level classes. So I was surprised at how much I liked this book because it's based on basketball. Sports is not always my favorite thing to read about. So I wasn't sure how this was going to go, but I absolutely love the historical aspect and how the author made basketball so relevant. So I rated that one 5 stars as well. I had a lot of 5-star reads this year. Didn't realize that. All right, Goldilocks. I'm going to actually group all of my Land of Stories-ish books together. So let's see. The Wishing Spell. Let's see. Okay. So Land of Stories Book 1, The Wishing Spell, and Land of Stories Book 2, The Enchantress Returns. Those were rereads. I'm a huge fan of the Land of Stories series. I read them a couple years ago and decided to reread them as audiobooks with my children in the car as we were driving to and from school because we have a little bit of a drive. And that has been so much fun sharing these stories with the kids. They love them. So those are always going to be 5 stars for me. And then Goldilocks is a graphic novel that was released this year, and it tells the backstory of Goldilocks and why she's an outlaw and on the run. So that was super fun to read, and it gave a lot more information to the story. I rated that one 4 stars. Next we have Guts, which is another graphic novel that I read. I read a lot of graphic novels this year. That was a new format of reading for me that I found that I really enjoyed. I'm hoping to read even more graphic novels next year. A lot of the graphic novels I read are middle grade because I am an elementary school librarian, so I like to try to stay current on what the kids are reading these days to kind of help with Reader's Advisory. So Guts is a book by Raina Telgemeier, and it is definitely kind of a growing up story geared toward girls. I put it on my 4th to 5th grade reads shelf on Goodreads. I enjoyed it more than I expected. A lot of my graphic novels that I read I enjoyed more than I expected. But it really was just a 4-star read for me. We'll put it there. And then we have the I Survived the Sinking of the Titanic graphic novel. I rated that one 4 stars. All right, If You Tell was a nonfiction true crime book that might have been like the only true crime book that I've read this year, which is kind of surprising. It was very heartbreaking. So it is a true story of murder, family secrets, and an unbreakable bond of sisterhood. So it's really about this group of sisters and everything that they went through with their parents growing up, and it was bad. There were times that I was absolutely cringing. My stomach hurt from reading what these girls went through when they were kids. So it was good, but it was long. I felt like the story really could have been told in half the number of pages that it was. Let me see how many pages it actually was. So it was 410 pages. It definitely could have been told in half that. It was drawn out quite a bit, and a lot of the same things were kind of reiterated over and over again. So I gave that one 3 stars. All right, R.L. Stine, Just Beyond was a little graphic novel that I read recently, and let me find it. I kind of went into this expecting Goosebumps or Fear Street kind of vibes. Didn't really get that. It's been a long time since I've read Goosebumps. I used to read them a lot as a kid. I didn't really get much of that. Really just wasn't into this. Not very many things were told. It was just, I don't know, it was just kind of weird. So I gave that one 3 stars. That one was probably more of 2.5 stars, and I was just being generous and rounding it up. All right, Kingdom of the Wicked. That one, I can already tell you, was super amazing. I absolutely loved it. I cannot wait to read Kingdom of the Cursed. This was the perfect book to read in October around Halloween time. I love the Italian culture that was brought into this book and the connection between demons and witches and just the whole setup of the world in this book. It was so good. 5-star read for sure. Okay, so this is Magnum Chase and the Gods of Asgard, book 1. So I've never read a Rick Riordan book before. I've never read Percy Jackson. I'm kind of ashamed to say that. So this is what I started with, and I was kind of worried about starting with it, but I really didn't have a problem with it. I read this one because I'm much more interested in Norse mythology than any other type of mythology out there, and I did really like it. It was definitely middle grade. There's a lot of like sarcasm and humor that I just didn't care for in the book, but as far as the bringing in the Norse mythology, I thought that was really great, and it did hold my attention. I gave that one 4 stars. Marked was a free ebook that I received, and this was just the prequel of the series. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to, being kind of a shorter like novella. I would like to read the other books in the series if I ever get around to it. There's just too many books in too little time. But I gave that one 4 stars. Goblin King, I gave 4 stars. Never After, that one was really good. I definitely got Land of Stories vibes from that one. And I love the twisted fairy tale vibes. I gave that one 5 stars. I think there's a sequel coming out to that one I'm excited about. And then we have New Kid. That was another graphic novel that I read earlier in the year. I read a lot of graphic novels for one of my classes. So New Kid, I gave 3 stars to. No Passengers Beyond This Point. I really wanted to like this one, but I didn't like it very much, so I gave it 3 stars. It was really confusing, especially for a middle grade book. Yeah, it just kind of fell flat for me. One of Us is Lying. I read this one in preparation for the show coming out because I was super excited about the show coming out. I wanted to read it before I watched the show. Ended up really liking the book. Ended up not really liking the show. So I have not read. I maybe watched 2 or 3 episodes of the show. Not much else. But I gave that one 4 stars. That one was fun to read. Orphan Island, I actually just finished a couple days ago. It was a book that I picked up at my school's book fair, and the premise was great. It gave me lots of Maze Runner vibes. There's this island that only kids are on, and only 9 kids can be on it, and every year a young kid is brought by this green boat, and when the green boat comes and the oldest kid is supposed to leave and they don't know where the boat takes them. I really think it's a kind of a metaphor for growing up and dealing with death and the afterlife, and there wasn't a really good conclusion to it, so I didn't get much closure from the story, and for that reason, I gave it 4 stars. It was sweet, but I think it was a lot deeper than I expected it to be for a middle grade novel, and I think that it would be really hard for some middle grade readers to get the full grasp of what is being addressed in that story. And then we have Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. Finally got on that bandwagon. Oh, that one. So it took me a long time to read that book. I ended up finishing it this year, but I read it as an audiobook, and I did enjoy it. That's another one. I think 2022 is going to be the year of sequels because I started a lot of series and didn't read past the first book. But that one was a 4-star read for me. And Rosie Revere and the Raucous Riveters was a book that I read with my 2nd graders last school year in the spring. It was really great for introducing my makerspaces and talking about science and technology and engineering and mathematics. So for those awesome connections that I was able to make, that was a 4-star read. I read 6 of Crows. 6 of Crows took me a long time to get through. I read Shadow and Bone, and then I read 6 of Crows because I wanted to be ready for the show releasing earlier this year. And I loved Shadow and Bone, and I had a harder time getting through 6 of Crows. It was kind of one of those that drug, but it definitely picked up toward the end. I gave that one 4 stars. I didn't love it as much as everybody else seemed to love it. It was definitely overhyped in my opinion. And then we had Skeleton Tree, which I just finished today, and I gave that one 5 stars. That one was a tearjerker. It made me cry and hit me in a place in my soul that I hadn't been hit by a book in a really long time. All right, Small Spaces. Let's see. That was a cool little horror middle grade novel. I gave it 4 stars as well. And then Starfish. Oh, that was a really good one. That was the only, no, I can't say it's the only one. That was one of the books that I read this year that was written in verse. I actually do really enjoy books that are written in verse. This one hit really home, really close to home, just about things that I went through as a child growing up, and it's definitely a growing up novel, and I really enjoyed it. It was very insightful and gave me a chance to reflect on my own childhood and growing up and how it made me who I am today. So that was a 5-star read as well. And Christmas Pig. So the Christmas Pig I just read, finished it like the day before Christmas, 2 days before Christmas, is by J.K. Rowling, who is the author of the Harry Potter books. Of course, most of you probably know that. So I was intrigued to see if she could write something outside of the Harry Potter world. And I actually really enjoyed this. I definitely want to read this book with my kids next year around Christmas time. I think they would love it. And I gave it 5 stars. Oops. I did not mean to put it up there. All right. That was a 5-star read as well. Super sweet, whimsical story. I just really enjoyed it. The Crowns of Croswald was a book that I received as an e-arc by the author. It is part of a larger series. Definitely, if you're a fan of Harry Potter, I think you would really enjoy this book. There was some of the action was a little bit hard to navigate. I felt like I got lost in it a little bit and had to reread to make sure I understood what was happening. I gave that one 4 stars. Then we have The Forgotten Girl. It's a little bit of a middle grade horror novel. I did enjoy this one. I love the historical aspect and the educational value of this book. It wasn't just a horror novel, but it was actually meant to teach something. I gave that one 4 stars as well. The Inheritance Game. I had it for quite a while. I just recently received the second one as a gift off of my Amazon wish list, so I'm super excited to read it. It wasn't what I expected at all, but I did enjoy it. 4 stars for that one. Okay, The Magic of Found Objects was a Kindle First Reads book for 1 month. I can't remember what it was. Totally different than anything that I typically read. But I did enjoy it for the most part. The ending, I think I lacked some closure in the ending of it, which I don't like. And the whole romance part of it kind of felt, It was more about family drama than romance. I feel like if it was focused more on the romance part, it probably would have been a little bit better. So I gave it 3 stars. The OK Witch was a graphic novel that I read earlier in the year. And I gave that one a 4-star rating. That was pretty good. Whoops. I'll throw it in there. And Bailey School Kids, Vampires Don't Wear Polka Dots. I kind of read this one as a preview before my kiddos at school read it. I was excited that they are releasing this series as a graphic novel, but I still feel like the actual novels are better than the graphic novel was, even though it's the same story. I don't know, it just felt too quick. Like it didn't give enough details and it was just too quick. So I gave that one 3 stars. And we're almost there. Okay, We Belong was another book that was written in verse. I was not feeling this one from the get-go. It was really hard for me to get through and read and understand, and it was just a little strange for me. I think I just had trouble connecting with the characters and what was being told. It was just really confusing for me. So I actually gave that one 2 stars. We Were Liars, I read as an audiobook for one of my graduate classes. This is an unreliable narrator in this book, which I absolutely love books like that, psychological thrillers. But there were some parts that were kind of hard to follow as well, so I gave that one 3 stars. When Stars Are Scattered was absolutely amazing. Nonfiction graphic novel that made me cry. That one was a 5-star read. And then our last book is the very first Wings of Fire graphic novel, The Dragonette Prophecy. That one's super hyped at school. All the kids love the Wings of Fire series, especially the graphic novels. So I thought I would pick it up and read it for myself to see what I thought. So I gave this one a 4-star rating. There we go. All right, so taking a look at my list here, I'm going to pick out a few favorites. So you can probably tell just from hearing me talk about some of these books which were my favorites. My absolute probably overall 100% favorite book I read this year was The Court of Silver Flames. And it was a book that I read early in the year. It was one of the first books that I read this year. Absolute favorite. Kingdom of the Wicked, definitely going to be a favorite. Love, love, love that one. Let's do a top 3. Let's do top 5. Okay, I loved Starfish. That one was really good. That one hit close to home. And I'm going to say Skeleton Tree. I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to say those are my 4 favorite reads of 2021 by far. The Court of Silver Flames, Kingdom of the Wicked, Starfish, and Skeleton Tree. So 2 of those are young adult fantasy novels. 2 of those are middle grade novels. One is fantasy, one is realistic fiction in verse. So those are definitely going to be my top 4 favorite books of the year. They were just so good, so good. The Court of Silver Flames might be my favorite book of all time, and I read it this year. So good. All right, so now that we've gone over all the books that I've read this year and tier ranked them, I'm going to kind of summarize my reading year with emojis. So I went through and looked at my 5 most used face emojis on my text messages, and I'm going to pick a book that matches each emoji, and it's a book that I've read this year. So the first emoji that I had was my little lovey emoji right here. And I'm going to say that the book that comes to mind immediately when I think about that is going to be A Court of Silver Flames. Not only did I love that book and felt so much love and connection, passion toward that book, but there was a lot of love and passion within the book between the characters. So that is the book that comes to mind for that one. Our second emoji is the laughing until we cry emoji. That's sideways. I'm probably going to say Kingdom of the Wicked because there's a lot of really funny, kind of witty, sarcastic things that Wrath and Amelia said to each other, and that just made me actually laugh out loud. So I would say Kingdom of the Wicked made me laugh until I cried. One that just kind of gave me warm fuzzies, like this emoji right here. I would say this one's a tie, probably between Skeleton Tree and Starfish. I feel like both of those were pretty bittersweet stories. Skeleton Tree actually made me cry. So that one probably would have been a little bit more teary if I were to actually pick an emoji to go with that book. Starfish gave me warm fuzzy vibes because the main character just went through so much change, and in the end she accepted herself and loved herself for who she was, and that was something she had to work through herself. She couldn't look for that from outside sources, and I just felt like that was very empowering to read that, and definitely gave me warm fuzzies at the end of that story. And then we have Tongue Sticking Out, so I think that one's just going to be like a silly book. And the book that comes to mind that I read that was really more of just a silly book, I would say actually, so Magnus Chase comes to mind for that one. Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, book 1, makes me think of kind of just a silly book because there's just a lot of sarcasm and humor, like middle school humor in that one. So that one just, when I think of silly, I think of that book. And the last one's The Angry Face. So which book made me angry? Honestly, Beasts of Prey ended on a really big cliffhanger. And that the second book, so that's not even out yet. So I have to wait for that one. Yeah, I'm going to say Beasts of Prey is going to be the book that made me angry. For one, it made me angry because I had to kind of wait half the book to really get into the good part of the book, and it made me angry because it ended on a cliffhanger, and I have to wait for the next book to come out before I can find out what happens next. So it made me angry, but in a good way. So I'll leave it at that. So that's my end of year wrap up in emojis. I hope you enjoyed that. I would love to hear what you read this year that would match up with some emojis that maybe you have in your phone, or maybe the same emojis that I used for this video. But that is all I have, and I will see you all next time. Bye!